Today, me and John will be discussing democracy, or whether democracy and its integrity is a scam or not. I mean, democracy has to be one of the most thrown around words nowadays, especially in an ironic time where democracies are falling out of popularity. Um, and it is really interesting to see how we went from around, I don't know, 80 years ago, fighting and giving it all just to preserve global democracy, going from that to potentially questioning ourselves, what is democracy and what does it really mean to live in a democratic institution? Now, John, would you like to start this icebreaker off and this discussion off by giving us a little technical detail and a little technical background on what exactly democracy is?
Yes, so Max, as you said there very well, democracy is a term which I think people like to throw around, or in the West they do, as we almost give democracy this godlike status. It's known for being, the equal and fair system from which all good is derived. And what is democracy a definition? It's a form of government where the people hold power either directly or they hold power through elected representatives. And through elected representatives, that's most common. We see that in the UK, the USA, and the vast majority of countries across the world. But what is democracy, though, first? So democracy is ancient Greek. It comes from two words, demos and kratos. And that literally means, demos means people and kratos means power. So democracy means just power of the people, effectively, or rule of the people. So where can we also trace democracy back to? We can trace it back to the 5th century BCE Athens, in which free men were permitted to be a member of the ecclesia or the assembly. And from this, they were able to vote and have a part to play in politics. And the last sort of thing which I think is important for when you look at the founding principles of democracy is that there are 3 key ancient Greek ideas behind it. And these are isonomia, which is equality under the law. And I should say, I don't speak ancient Greek at all, so the pronunciation may not be on point. But
This sounds perfect to me.
yeah. But the 3 principles are isonomia, which is equality under the law, isogoria, which is equality of speech, and isokratia, which is equality of power. However, Max, I think the most interesting thing you said there, and the thing which sort of stuck in my head instantly when you said it, is that we are in a time now where democracy is decreasing. And so, as a sort of icebreaker as well, what do you think about this idea of democracy's journey sort of being like a mountain? Yeah, on from the bottom of the mountain where it was just an idea, to the 18th century where it's progressing, to maybe its peak at around the war. And now we're on this slope down the mountain of a decrease.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, honestly speaking, the way you describe it, it does really sound like an Aristotelian tragedy. You have the hamartia, the fatal flaw of democracy. And what is that actually? And the funny thing is, like everything else, like everything that can be advertised politically or apolitically, you can take it at its literal sense as what it is, and you can take it for something greater than it actually is and amplifies benefits. I feel like in the last century, we lived in a world wherein democracy was not necessarily the best choice, but it was the least worst choice, or that is how sadistic people will put it. And the question is, what really differentiates the glorified democracy, or the term it is placed as nowadays, what differentiates democracy in its fancy term compared to mob rule, since they're both technically the same thing? They're demos kratos, it's people power. So what is the difference between brutish mob rule and democracy, after all, since they're both the same thing and both abide by the same principles?
Yeah, I like that idea a lot there. And that's something that I do hear a lot, especially when I talk to people that are quite keen in philosophy. And they always refer back to this idea from Locke, actually. And that is that we actually live more in an oligopoly than a democracy. And the reason for that is simply because the people that are most interested in politics are generally the richest people. And these are also the people that have the time to vote and to participate in politics the most. Therefore, in democracy, what we're really seeing is perhaps an increase sort of and a unproportionate representation of that richest 1 or 5% in society over the interest of the majority of people. But I think that's less so when I look at the UK system split into constituencies. However, something like in the United States, perhaps, for example, it's less, you've not got these small constituencies, but for the presidential election, you've got big states.
So big states, more big states, big names. In the US, it is a lot more poster child than it is in the UK. Actually, let's take a look at some recent comments made by notable members of public. We've got Bernie Sanders here, at Bernie Sanders on Twitter. He just posted, "We must overturn Citizens United and get big money out of politics. Democracy is not for sale. #political revolution." And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at AOC also commented along the lines, "Dark money and unchecked lobbying are eroding our democratic institutions. Time to take a big stand. #end corruption." So what are your thoughts on these public's views and, I would say, rather harsh comments about the veracity and the integrity of democracy as it is nowadays, especially in the United States?
So yes, this is really to do with the United States. And following this election, I think especially with one man, Elon Musk, we have seen a sort of slightly interesting events occur, which do slightly make me fear what could happen to democracy in the States. And that's really around this idea of one man controlling it that Bernie Sanders was talking about. And that is the power that Elon Musk has had in this election. So we've seen him give $1 million a day to voters as swing states. It was declared constitutional and allowed though. And this did obviously encourage people to vote for Trump. And we've also seen this man with huge economic influence, who was helping people in the flood, directly endorse Donald Trump. And I think his endorsement as the world's richest man, it does sort of affect this democratic system that we have. And it relates back to that idea that I gave of the richest people having the biggest say in politics. Because Elon Musk really has used his economic influence to help Trump win the election. What do you think about that, Max?
I mean, it's a record-breaking number. He donated almost 200 million into his campaign in total. That's insane. I mean, it is borderline. If you take a step back and kind of look at it, it is borderline corruption, because it's almost like, and it is quite literally buying. I would agree with Bernie Sanders on this one. It is buying. But then if you want to follow it in a very logical, let's say, deontological approach, you could say, well, he has the right to do whatever he wants with his money. It is, after all, legally earned money, legal tenure, so he can do whatever he wants with it, if it so be endorse a politician that he feels has or should be in power and would benefit him and his enterprise further, which it inevitably would, due to the amount of government agencies that he relies on in his big business, everything from Tesla to SpaceX to Neuralink, everything. So it makes sense, and also rationally, he has the right to do what he wants. But the question is this institutionally integral? And if this is the case, is this a really democratic outcome? Was this process democratic or not?
I mean, I think obviously it's hard to ever say an election's democratic, because you have so many people who say Russia was involved. There's already been a few suggestions by people that it could have been involved. You never know. I mean, to an extent, there's probably external countries involved in every election. But I think Elon Musk definitely did sort of subvert the democratic system in America a bit. And I think you'll know he did it, but for him, he won't mind, because he wanted Trump to be in power. 200 million for him, that's pot money. And so he was willing to throw it at the people effectively in order to get Trump into power. But I think on a wider basis as well, has Trump harmed democracy? It's hard to say, but he definitely hasn't helped it. But on a wider global stage, especially in Europe now, we are seeing democracy fall down this sort of slippery slope in certain countries. One example which sort of comes to mind is, and sorry for the pronunciation again, Erdogan in Turkey, and also Viktor Orban in Hungary. These are two men who have entered a democratic system of government, but I'm now shifting this towards an autocratic system purely because, in my opinion, I think they fear losing, and they fear that by losing power, they'd lose all any sense of influence they have, which is a sign of a very bad democracy. And so they've had to make it that they could stay in power. What do you think about this, Max? And does democracy across the world perhaps sliding away?
It's very hard to say. I mean, on one hand, yes, you're giving like veritable examples of like, Viktor Orban and Erdogan. But you need to kind of take a step back. And I would disagree with you on this to say that democracy in general is being sold out or falling. Because the truth is, and we've seen this with a lot of recent elections in the mainland Europe, the European parliamentary system, that is in most countries like Italy, in Austria, per se, my own country, or France, for example, with Le Pen and Macron, you could see that it was very hard to see or predict who would win what. And due to the proportional representation system, or the fact that in general, there's a very delicate election and constituent mechanism in many of these congresses in these nations, it becomes increasingly difficult to have a landslide victory or to just have one party surprise you in the elections.
Yeah.
Because it is a delicate system where it's hard to buy in votes because you inevitably form coalitions, and it is very easy to veto in these mechanisms in general. So it might not be as simple and as straightforward as it is in America, but I would say that has a benefit to it because it is in general more prone to be less volatile politically over time. And you would need you would need a complete paradigm shift to actually see any notable change in government. So I would say the examples of Orban and Erdogan are true, they're not to be denied, but then again, they're not representative of mainland European parliamentary politics and the mechanisms that govern most mainland European majority states. So, yeah.
Yes, and that is an interesting point you made there. And perhaps you sort of further analyze this. And that's really the way that democracy works. So in some places, you have a sense of proportional representation. And that mainly you have it a lot in mainland Europe, and that's multiple parties being in governance. Some who probably far more democratic. However, on the other hand, you've got the European, or the English, and Great Britain actually, first past the post system, the winner take all sort of thing, where perhaps the most popular candidate isn't the person who's elected. So Max, as a sort of another point of discussion perhaps to delve into, what do you think about proportional representation versus a first past the post system?
I mean, it's a very tough question to answer because I myself am not too well informed on the technicalities of how proportional representation works. I am aware that it allows for outcomes wherein people, like you said, people with significantly more popularity and vote receiving less representation in terms of small or fewer numbers of seats in Congress at the end or in some parliament. But I have to say that in general, I mean, let's analyze what happened with Reform UK for a moment. They tried to, the major government, like the major parties, Labour and the Tories, they kind of tried to depict that Reform was not really a party to be taken seriously. It was more of a bluff, let's put it that way. And Nigel Farage was loud, influential, but they tried to basically downplay his influence, which at the end actually proved to be a hell of a lot more influential than they advertised it to be. So I feel like, on a sense, they have the right to downplay it, but in another way, you could argue that it does not really reflect democratically the will of the people. Because if you're going to have an individual who reflects proportionately the most, or who reflects what people want, then you should reflect it equally in terms of power and representation in policy and government.
Yeah, I agree with you there. What you said about Farage as well is true. In many ways, Farage was sort of the rising star of the UK general election in the sun. He was, he's tried, I think, 6 times before to be an MP. So he knows the system pretty well. But this election, he had a clear message. He had clear backing as well. And he put all of this together to deliver what was actually quite an impressive result for Reform UK. They became the third biggest party in the UK, beating the Lib Dems, despite only having 5 MPs elected, though. But he was really at the centre, I felt, of this election in the summer, and he had a clear message. He was saying, the Tories are awful, look what they've done, put the country in tatters, so vote for me. And people liked that a lot. And I think whether you like him or you hate him, you have to admit he's a good speaker, and he's very good. He's like Trump in the sense that he's very good at PR opportunities. And this gets voters. We can look at this with the US election. Trump, like Farage, uses these sort of publicity stunts all the time. There was one about him being a garbage man, even working in McDonald's. These are things that I think people find sort of oddly relatable and really help them get votes effectively at the end of the day. And so I think perhaps maybe it's populism spreading across the world, but at the end of the day, it's also a very good campaign strategy, which is being used in democracies. And if you think about it, democracy is appealing to the most number of people. So maybe these are very democratic ways. What do you think about all of this, though, Max?
I mean, you make a very good connection, like a reflective point back to democracy. And this kind of brings us back to the main discussion of this argument, or this debate. Is democracy really a scam? Is it what it's set out to be? And interestingly, what you mentioned to populism, it's a very good point, because during this time, during the British elections or the general elections, you would also see that populism would not be isolated to Britain, but you would see populism become populist, this populist, traditionalist, right-wing rhetoric be very popular and very populist in mainland continental Europe. You would see in the EU, various countries, all the way from the Netherlands, you would have the infamous minister who would quite literally have viral videos of him denouncing the amount of migration coming to the Netherlands.
Yep.
You would have that blow up. On the other hand, you would have, the crisis in France where Le Pen actually stood a veritable chance against Macron. And the fact that neither of those gained the momentum or had the final official rubber-stamped representation that people thought they would get based on just the sheer momentum behind these populist right-wing movements in Europe, goes to show that maybe democracy is just a left-wing elitist deep state rhetoric, or at least that's what the conspiracy theorists say. Maybe democracy is only in name democracy, and maybe it's not actually representative of what the people want, but it's representative of what those who control the people want. And that really makes you think, if on so many instances, due to, convenient loopholes, that the populists are not represented in a populist fashion in government, then what is the point of a democratically elected mechanism in place to ensure that people's desires and wills and views and perspectives are represented and appreciated and respected in government?
Yeah, I've got to say, there's some quite striking ideas there. But I think it goes back to this idea, which is perhaps a good one to finish on today. And that is that democracy isn't ideologically perhaps, or in practice, the best political system. And at the end of the day, we know no other system that has worked as well as it has worked. Yes, it has many flaws. We see this in pretty much every election, perhaps. But at the end of the day, it does the job, doesn't it? I think it's very hard for a political system not to represent the rich or just the few. Even in communism, you see the ruling by the proletariat, or you eventually see a system in which you have this sort of Politburo or oligopoly at top, which are supposedly representing the people's interests. But in summary, I think for this episode, we've both sort of delved into this issue of democracy, or maybe not issue, maybe opportunity rather. And we've looked at how it has worked in the US election and in elections across the world.
I mean, I'd like to add on to that in the summary, actually. You raise a very good point that inevitably, yes, every system has flaws. Democracy just so happens to be the one with the least flaws compared to others.
Yeah.
Thus, it might not be the best. It's far from the most perfect one. But it still is the best of the worst, and therefore we shall go for it. Lost aversion. But an interesting point I like to make is that Plato, he raised a very interesting criticism and attack of democracy, known as the craft analogy, basically saying like he used the craft analogy to say if you were to elect someone to perform surgery on you, a life-threatening surgery, you would not elect the people to do it, you would elect a professional doctor. So if you were to elect someone to make policy and rule the country, which is arguably an extremely important job, why would you opt for the non-specialized majority, the uninformed and unenlightened individuals who potentially lack the knowledge to make informed choices on who shall lead government? Why not go for a specialist ruler or someone who was a professional in what they did? And long story short, if you analyze and break down this argument, it falls apart because it is irrelevant whether the people are informed enough or make the informed choice, even if society decides to elect a ruler that will inevitably harm them. If it is their genuine desire to elect it, they have the inherent natural right to dictate their own policies. That is just the right way to think about it. It does not matter consequentialist, if you're a consequentialist or utilitarian, it does not matter what the outcome is. It is the means to the end. Is the means justify the end, not the end justifying the means.
And yes, I think that's perhaps a very good idea to finish on today. So I think it's been a very interesting discussion we've had. But I think the thing that makes this discussion so relevant is that it's happening around us at the moment.
So in conclusion, democracy is democracy. It's still harsh when you address the question, is democracy a scam? Is it dirty? No, it's not. It's not perfect. But if you think about it, and most people who like argue against democracy, yes, there are flaws to be addressed, but realistically, we have worked to the best possible way of democracy. Maybe technology will allow us to represent our beliefs in a more fluid, dynamic way in policymaking in the future. But as of now, it is the right and morally sound and logically, deontologically sound way of governance.
Okay, and I hope you enjoyed listening, and see you soon. Hello and welcome back to the second episode today. We are talking about hustle culture. So the hustle culture mentality, motivation or manipulation. So Max, you're very keen on Twitter, social media, and you keep very up to date with all this hustle culture stuff. So firstly, can you just explain what hustle culture is?
I'll gladly do that, sir. Why do I call you sir? Anyways, no, hustle culture. It is this new neo movement on the internet that's kind of going around through motivational speakers and gurus like Imangaji and Andrew Tate, the man, the myth, the legend himself. But it's about this doctrine almost of towards young men that is sold as this appealing way of being successful and being in this monk mode wherein you're completely in control of all of your desires and distractions and you're focused on one thing only, working. And it's promoted in a way basically to say that everything, it kind of vilifies anything that isn't productive. Brings it back to the biblical ideal of having an angel and devil on your shoulder, that you should listen to the angel and ignore the devil. So anything that spikes your dopamine, anything that ranges from eating unhealthy to skipping workouts to playing video games, just not working till you burn out, is vilified and seen as this negative thing that harms you, and it's seen as this drug almost. So hustle culture is this new neo movement that promotes hyper productivity, hyper focus, and hyper discipline to especially mostly young men who are seeking to make it big in the finance world, or make it big in the internet world, or make it big in life in general.
Yes, and I can definitely see what you're saying there, because this is linked to this sort of idea of modern stoicism, it's called. And those ideals which are associated with hustle culture, working all day, working out till you sort of drop. These sort of ideas, these are what are seen with this, what they call nowadays modern stoicism. And those are these ideas of what being a quote unquote real man is. And these are, as you said there, Max, working until you drop, no time to relax. I'm going to go and produce videos, and it's mainly for these people on the internet. And it's sort of led to this perhaps almost unhealthy image of people portraying themselves as almost workaholic being a good thing. So, Max, can you further attack that and delve into that for me and our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Um, Personally speaking, I would say that hustle culture has kind of been sold along with the complement of toxic masculinity, and that's highly ironic if you ask me. And this is a personal opinion, personal logic. But the reason why I say toxic or masculinity in general being seen as this appeal because it appeals to the masculine man to be the breadwinner, to be successful, to make infinite amounts of money and to attract the women because after all, it's sold that women only care about the success of a man instead of personality himself is or has, which is a very objective and I would probably argue a very inaccurate objective assumption out of a subjective matter. But the fact that it is being sold with a masculine appeal is ironic in the sense that the hyper workaholic culture, which promotes lack of sleep, excessive exercise, strict diet, intense transformation on one hand, you could argue, yes, it's admirable because you become a workaholic and you get a lot done. But on the other hand, you're decreasing your levels of testosterone, you're decreasing your health, you're decreasing your libido. So, in a sense, it is making you biologically less masculine. So, does it really appeal to the masculine self? It seems ironic in my sense. And that's my attack. I mean, personally speaking, I was alert to this when I was like 12, 13, 14 years old. Because there are always these individuals online who are promoting, drop shipping courses. And the fact is, matter of fact is, it is becoming increasingly easy to just print money nowadays. It is gambling because you need to get lucky with these things. But inevitably, when you do get lucky, you're set for a lifetime. You can open up a drop shipping, which is already by now saturated, but you can also sell online courses and generate them with AI. You don't even need to spend any time making them. You can automate YouTube videos through things like InVideo with AI, where you can get like a long podcast clip separated into high dopamine AI edited captions generated videos and just print them out on different accounts and you will get eventual ad revenue.
I
So
will say that this is being done with this at all.
no, it's not. It's not. We're just promoting our stuff because we want to inform you guys. But in general, I feel like the ability and the ease of making money nowadays has kind of sold and promoted this appeal further because individuals are now seeing I don't need to actually work on studying and work on having an education to pursue money making. I can directly jump into it. And it's this let's go, let's start now, let's low barriers to entry that really adds that level of additional motivation for individuals because they can actually get it done. So why not get it done? And that leads to this toxic addiction, this toxic workaholic addiction that is being glorified and glorified and glorified non-stop everywhere.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And I think, yes, there is hugely ironic that this is being portrayed as masculine, but nowadays, the main way information is being spread towards young people is through social media. And as these people on social media have tons of followers, they are controlling the narrative of how masculinity is being portrayed. And they're portraying it as hustle culture. Why they're doing this? Simply, as you said, because it makes them more money. They wouldn't care about it if it wasn't making them any money, but they can sell these courses and these sort of, I mean, I don't know much about them at all, but these sort of online schemes in which you can drop ship, which I'm still not too sure what that is. And they manage to sell all these other things purely because at the end of the day, they're sharing this view of masculinity basically just to line their pockets. However, as we said there, it is an issue for social media. And so I thought perhaps we could sort of draw the attention to what it's like on Twitter, um, the social media body described by Elon Musk to be the sort of meeting place. So perhaps it's quite good at representing. So the common themes on Twitter that we see for hustle culture, um, well, firstly, it's this idea of, as you said, working till you drop. Very sort of traditional masculine ideas like working out, eating lots of steak. These very sort of typical masculine images. However, on Twitter, there's a lot of criticism towards it. This mainly comes from the mental health movement. Obviously, hustle culture and mental health are not on the same line or parallel lines, but they're rather clashing face on. And obviously, people are sharing their personal stories on social media about burnout and stress due to the constant pressure which hustle culture promotes. Similarly, many sort of notable figures have promoted their views against hustle culture. Um, for example, Ariana Huffington said, "Burnout is not the price we have to pay for success. Time to prioritize well-being over relentless hustle. Hashtag thrive." I think that really there just encapsulates my personal view against hustle culture. And that is really, it's time, it's great. Everyone should try and work for their family to give them the best possible opportunities and try to be the best version of themselves. But then at the end of the day, there's no point being that if you're going to throw out your well-being and be, well, utterly depressed yourself. What would you have to say about this, Max, and how hustle culture is being portrayed critically on social media?
I mean, I really, you draw the point you made that like the whole point of working hard is so you can bring a better, brighter future for your family and better opportunities. That really strikes a chord because if the whole point of working hard is for the betterment of yourself, but then
Yeah,
if you're simultaneously destroying that, what are you working for? I mean, what good is $1 million or a Lamborghini if you are on life support and have cancer because you don't get enough sleep and you develop malignant tumors? But it is a very, is it, it's a philosophical paradox. And the problem is, with a lot of these modern day hustle culture themes, the world, the internet, that is the biggest money making machine and biggest target for these hustle culture workers, is just so incessant. You need to be online 24/7. If you're doing stock trading or even traditional jobs like investment banking that require you to have minimal sleep and a horrible health, it promotes and glorifies it. And the fact that these jobs are going back into popularity along with alternatives that don't even require education, where you can just do it from the ease of your own home and stare at a laptop 12 hours a day, well, it promotes the ideal that you can only succeed if you follow this. And it promotes the ideal, a very limited definition of success being monetary freedom and being hyper rich, hyper wealthy, hyper masculine, hyper a polarizing extreme of the example. And the problem is people cannot differentiate propaganda from real life because of course, in order to attract the attention, in order to sell the courses, in order to advertise and make money, the people who made it, which is by luck and perchance a very small amount, are the ones who are showing you this polarized version, not because it's the reality, but because that's something they need to polarize themselves towards so that it attracts attention and it serves the purpose of advertisement. If they didn't, if they showed you the realistic, mundane truth of it, that there was some sort of balance, or the fact that they actually did maintain some sort of health whilst working and did not do and practice what they actually preached, then that would not get that much attention. I'm not saying everybody's a scammer and lying about the truth. Definitely, certain people had to do the extreme to achieve the extreme. But still, a vast majority of them, and to a vast extent, not entirely, would they dedicate themselves to this monk mode, unimaginably extreme workaholic lifestyle because it is practically unfeasible. They would not be where they are if it weren't for that.
and I think a very good point to make there as well is what we see on social media definitely isn't actually what's going on in their lives. I don't think they're working all 24 hours a day. I think in reality, they're probably just relaxing or, on a nice beach somewhere, making the money, using the money that they've made us off of young boys is more likely. Um, Sort of going on to another idea which has been in the news recently and is linked to hustle culture. And I said idea, but it's actually far more of an event. And that is the recent boxing match there was between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. So I obviously don't really know much about this at all. However, Max, you're far more up to date on the internet and what's viral there. So can you explain to us this sort of influencer boxing event that took place? But Neil, specifically, how does this link with hustle culture?
Gladly. I mean, the recent internet boxing match between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson is the epitome, actually, of the power of clout and whether clout legitimizes people or not, or whether it should legitimize people or not, and therefore linking back to the discussion of because clout is the main driving force behind
Oh,
the
majority there. Can you go also what clout is as well?
yeah. By that. So it's too much internet geeky terminology, but clout basically refers to the the aura or the appeal in terms of statistics of the amount of followers or influence that a influencer or digital personality has of people. So you've got vast amounts of millions of followers, brands, presence across all forms of social media. You have clout, you've got fame, internet fame, and internet fluent influence. Problem is, people argue whether clout should legitimize a person and whether we should take someone seriously and therefore what they advertise seriously based on clout. And the thing is, internet boxing is nothing new. It's been like since the advent of the KSI versus Logan Paul fight a few years back, the first one and the second one, and then the ones following that. It's become the spectacle. Problem is, till then, it's never been viewed with legitimacy. It's never been viewed
Yeah.
as actual boxing. It was viewed as influencers settling their grievances and being able to say, well, I beat you up, so technically I'm better than you and I win this beef or this conflict that they have ongoing. But the fact was, it was viewed through a lens of, it was viewed through a comical lens that allowed people to distance themselves from reality and what they're watching. Problem is, with the most recent rendition of this internet boxing drama, you would have Jake Paul go against a legitimate and a professional legend, Mike Tyson himself. And yes, I mean, the guy is twice the age of Jake Paul and lost. But still, the point was the ethical point beyond, like assaulting an old man in the boxing ring, because that's what it was. Sorry, that's just my opinion.
I mean,
Or
it literally was that. I mean, Mike Tyson heard the paycheck and he was basically said, I'm fine to be beaten by a 28-year-old up. Yeah.
I mean, for 20 million, I do that too. I've just said, uh, but, but yeah, it's the fact that people seem to say that, well, Jake Paul wants to legitimize himself because he's now saying he's the face of boxing. You aren't. You might be the face of YouTube boxing, but YouTube boxing is not real boxing. There's a difference between being a professional influencer and using that is not a valid argument just because you've got influence digitally is not the same as having influence and stature in a sport that is professional. You're an influencer that boxes, not a boxer that has influence. And that is the distinction we need to make. And bringing back to hustle culture, a lot of these individuals who promote this hypermasculine workaholic agenda, they themselves legitimize their words and actions through both their made up numbers. I mean, most of it is not made up, but they do make up certain facts and they do exaggerate and to an extent make propaganda about how lavish they're living. And they use their clout as justification for what they're saying. My words are right, yours are not, because I have made these figures and I have these followers and I have this presence and influence. So you should worship me like a god, almost like a cult of personality, because that is what it's been developed to. And the problem is, this is most influential to mentally underdeveloped teenagers, which are very prone to impulse, very prone to strong emotions. So when you have this propaganda of, look at all this exaggerated, lavish lifestyle I'm living, and then you've got these edits full of sound effects and music that people are hooked to, frankly, it creates such a strong impression on a malleable mind that is unable to make rational decisions on its own at 13 or 14 years old. Even at 17 years old, my age, I still don't have a fully developed brain, but still, I'm able to see that a lot of people are getting influenced unfairly and unjustly, and they make these impulsive decisions. And the problem is, because of the ease and low barriers of entry, you can straight away buy a course for $10, $15 and jump in and sell and perpetuate the scam and perpetuate the cycle. And when you have some people who actually make it through perchance, let's say a 14-year-old makes $20,000 windfall, but it's a one-time thing. Does not matter. They've made $20,000 once. They think they're going to be able to do it again and again when they actually don't, because it's all to do with chance and not meritocracy, or not based on actual skill sets that is stable, like in the real job market. So it's a self-perpetuating problem, and it really, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, as you said, that, and going back to influencer boxing, which is obviously a form of entertainment that has seen a huge rise and increase in popularity over the years. This really does represent just influencers saying, we can't settle our squabbles on the screen, so we're going to do it in what is a very traditionally masculine sport, boxing. So this really does add into this hustle culture mentality, which is being built and built up for young men. And a very interesting figure who obviously has to be mentioned here is Andrew Tate. Obviously, Andrew Tate is very misogynistic. Um, but he has sold, basically, he sort of almost sold himself online. He used him being very misogynistic to gain views, which obviously equates to money in the world of social media. So Andrew Tate used this sort of unique selling point he almost has to sort of build up this culture, this hustle culture and this chauvinistic culture in order for him to profit off it. So Max, perhaps as our finishing sort of points in this episode, can you sort of delve more into Andrew Tate, who obviously was a huge figure on the internet in the past few years?
I mean, I'll definitely go into it. I do have to say I disagree to an extent. Of the misogynism. I mean, he does say and does portray an aura of chauvinism to a lot that he does say, and that is one of his polarizing selling points. But at the end of the day, his personality may go and revert a lot and posit a lot of traditionalist propaganda and a lot of traditionalist agendas on a young majority. And the truth is, it is being increasingly effective because we do see that the liberal feminist movement cause a lot of opportunity and cause for concern for young men who tend to believe the one-sided stories told by Andrew Tate. But in a lot of cases, it is not necessarily purely misogynism because he does criticize men for being feminine and women for being over masculine. And he does criticize not either side of the either gender, but he criticizes the harmony and the balance of values between these genders. So that kind of creates this illusion, especially since a lot that is said and shared around nowadays is taken out of context. It's like 5-second clips out of a 2-hour discussion.
Yeah.
So people often lack the full story. But the truth is, regardless of what, Andrew Tate at the end of the day is a polarized figure, but not necessarily because he actually is polarizing himself. It's just the fact that what he promotes as an agenda, what he promotes to advertise his courses and he himself as a product because he's marketing himself is polarized and unrealistic. And this relates back to the ideals of workaholism. The fact that he wants to sell courses and wants to sell you a schedule and a lifestyle. Inherently, he's selling you a lifestyle of working and working and working. And whilst, yes, it's important to be disciplined, it's important to hit the gym on a weekly, day-to-day basis, it's important to stick to a diet, to have a clear, disciplined work regimen, and not to slack off. That is not to say you don't have to actually enjoy the process itself, keep a balance, and value yourself as you're going through it, as you're working. Because when you're working for yourself, and you need to keep that to yourself. You're not working to destroy yourself, so you have nothing to spend the fruits of your labor on. I mean, logically and also deontologically, what is the purpose of working till you drop, quite literally? So bringing back to this, I'd like to I'll hand the mic back to you in a second. I just like to put my end to the summary to this discussion. Workaholism and this hustle culture is becoming increasingly popular, but not necessarily for the right reasons. It is a combination of polarizing and heavily influential, irresponsibly influential figures on social media targeting for capitalist profit, targeting younger, more impressionable minds, and trying to indoctrinate them with this lifestyle of overworking themselves. It does have benefits in the sense that it does remind people to work hard, and it does, in certain instances, through exaggeration, make people get the message. I need to lose weight. I need to stop eating junk food. I need to hit the gym, be healthy again, or I need to start working. I need to start seeing progress. I need to lock in and work in school, get better grades. It does have positive impacts, but the problem is a lot of it can be taken out of context and it can be overdone, and that will inevitably lead to some degree of irreparable damage.
Yes, I think I agree with the bulk of what you said there. I do sort of still find Andrew Tate, whilst he may have talked more about the harmony, I think it is still fairly objective that he is quite misogynistic. But I think perhaps the most interesting thing you said there, and what I definitely agree with, is when you said work to enjoy yourself. And that is what hustle culture really does oppose. It opposes this lifestyle in which you can find sort of harmony between your well-being and your work. And that is, I think, a very important thing for all people to consider.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening, everyone, still. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Hello, and welcome back to the third episode. Today, we're going to be discussing tech addiction and loneliness, and whether this is a myth or reality. So, Max, both you and me, inevitably, we spend, well, I guess, quite a lot of time online. We are literally spending time online right now. Let's perhaps firstly go into this as like an overview. Like, are young people really addicted to tech?
I mean, let's actually know what I think this is a really great conversation for us to have because we are young
Yeah.
people. We are the lab rats for today's conversation. So why not let's start off with an honest question. John, when's the last time you were scrolling or doom scrolling?
I mean, I'll be honest, it's so frequent. I mean, not multiple times a day, but you can almost just feel the algorithm of Instagram enticing you in as you look at one reel. It almost forced to scroll almost to the next one when your attention span doesn't allow you to watch almost the one you're currently watching.
Mm.
And I do feel that, yeah, it's just doom scrolling is almost designed so that we do doom scroll.
Yeah.
And the nature of it is that it's so addictive in a way that you don't realize you're doom scrolling until you just take a minute, step out, and I'm like, yeah, I'm doom scrolling. And it's so easy and it's so effortless that it's so easy to do it. And I just accidentally find myself doing it so frequently. Max, the same for you.
I mean, honestly speaking, first of all, to our viewers who maybe have a life and aren't like familiar with Gen Z slang, doom scrolling refers to a phase, a meditative, ironically meditative phase where you empty your brain and quite literally just end up scrolling for a marathon on your phone on these short form content platforms like TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. And the funny thing is, I believe the fact that originally we had something called Musically. I think was it Musically?
Yeah, there's
Yes.
the new ones.
Yeah. And then it transitioned to TikTok. And then from TikTok, recently, we've got other conglomerates like YouTube and Instagram capitalizing on this phenomenon, which proves that tech addiction is not only very real, but is very potent and it's growing. The fact that all these companies are trying to market similar products with similar scrolling short form content mechanisms kind of proves that it's working. So I would say actually it is a very real phenomenon, but it is still being increasingly hard to objectively assess how addicted society is because in between year groups and age groups and different niche content consumers, we see different trends of content consumption. Some people only hop on Instagram or TikTok to watch cat videos, but they don't stay on to doom scroll. Other people don't have an explicit niche or purpose to log on. They just open the app out of habit, out of boredom, almost out of muscle memory. Sometimes speaking from personal experience, just like muscle memory. And you start somewhere and you end up somewhere completely different. That's all part of the gimmick. So tell me, John, would you say, are you a niche content consumer or do you just do it out of habit and boredom? And what does that tell you about your own, like, honest reflection of this tech addiction?
Yeah, I mean, I do really find that I just sometimes do it out of boredom. And I just fall into this sort of inevitable trap. I mean, I enter my phone when I'm a bit bored, and the first app I see is sort of Instagram in a way. And so I click on it and I just get stuck in this sort of cycle. And with the reels I have, there is a bit of a niche content thing, which I always get like a similar kind of thing. And that's why I like watching them.
Mm.
But the way it gets me there really is just my boredom. And it's just really bizarre to think about how it's plays such a significant role in our lives that almost in our subconscious, we just find our fingers drifting to Instagram or TikTok on a screen. But Max, another key question which I think about is this a tech addiction that young people have? Or are we just spending a lot of time using technology because we really need it and it is an essential part of our lives?
I mean, I find this is a very interesting turn to say or bring into question how essential tech is. Tech, first of all, generalizing tech in itself is quite hard to do because
Yeah.
tech and tech is different. You've got tech in terms of calling people for the logistics. That is essential. I mean, we live in a century where you cannot survive without technology. You are inherently a cyborg. You need to communicate with technology because most of the time you only can do it through that. And moreover, Apple Wallet, people pay now without carrying physical wallets. They carry digital wallets because it's just more practical.
Yeah.
So in that sense, yes, tech is becoming increasingly necessary and essential. However, when we bring about another aspect of how essential something could be, let's talk about one of Maslow's major needs for proper, healthy existence of human beings, and that would be relationships. I mean, what would you say has, or what would you say is the correlation between the impact of having increased amounts of time spent on unessential entertainment technology like short form content, reels, TikToks? What would you say is the correlation and impact of increased time on those platforms to real life relationships and the loneliness epidemic that's growing amongst young individuals nowadays?
So, firstly, on real life relationships, I think technology has just really changed the nature of real life relationships. It hasn't necessarily made it worse or better. And actually, saying that, I do think it's made it better. If you look 100 years ago, if you were in, let's say, Surrey, and the other person was in Oxford, like with you and me, you would have to send a letter, and that would take a long time. Now we have instant access to people who we have relationships with, whether that's a friendship or a loving relationship, because you can be in contact with them in a matter of milliseconds. So I think technology is almost has made us the relationships that we have a lot closer, because it has enabled us to remain in constant contact with them. However, obviously, real world doom scrolling and being addicted to Fortnite, it has damaged people's social skills. You can see it. There's sort of these memes that go around of like Fortnite kids in the basement, locked up, drinking Prime all day. And the sad reality is that these kids are having barely any social skills because they're addicted to consoles all day. And the only real relationships they form are sadly those with sort of false names on Fortnite, like 2018 Gamer Boy or something like that. There has been a real decline in real social um, interactions, and that has been replaced by technology.
I
However,
agree with you. I mean, like, sorry to interrupt, but I have to say, raising to the point of Fortnite kid, I actually still do play Fortnite, and I do it as a substitute for real life interactions. And I really do, I do commiserate with what you say when with regards to Fortnite or in general the loneliness epidemic and its relationship with
yeah.
substitutes for real dopamine. So let's look at the science behind this. Why do we want to look at videos? I mean, most of the viral videos online are the ones that really tempt us and are radical or explicit in the sense that it appeals to an extreme degree to visuals, to curiosity, as in facts you would never know and never really care about. It kind of keeps you on the edge via kind of capitalizing and exploiting your dopamine receptors in your brain. So you become dopamine addicted consistently. Now, the problem is your brain biologically through uses dopamine to build up positive feedback loops to kind of function. It is a biological function that has progressed through evolution. However, when it's being capitalized and you expose yourself to dopamine that it's not naturally available in biology or in the world, environmentally speaking, then you risk having unprecedented levels of dopamine exposure, and you become desensitized to it, and you become furthermore, your addiction is aggravated. So what I'm trying to say is that these technologies express or expose you to dopamine to a level that is beyond what's healthy and beyond what your body's biologically meant to endure. And the problem is you feel that when you engage with real life interactions versus those quick, easy access dopamines,
Yeah.
and like interactions. Because after doom scrolling or after playing games, you usually do it because you're bored, and afterwards you feel empty, you feel hollow, kind of have like a sugar crash. It's like energy from caffeine or sugar. It's not real energy, it's borrowed energy. And just like this, it's borrowed happiness, it's borrowed pleasure. So the moment you are off of um that moment of ecstasy, you kind of have this crash, this sugar crash or this dopamine crash, and you feel hollow, you feel depressed, and it all kind of compensates back because your brain is not meant to endure this. So in order to balance neurochemicals, obviously it makes sense that this will happen. And when you compare that to having real life interactions, that does not happen because when I meet my friends in real life, I feel happy that I've seen them. I do not experience a significant crash in energy. Just like having good nights of sleep, you feel genuinely energetic. You aren't borrowing energy. You deserve it. You've earned it, so it stays with you. Exactly. So what would you say about that? Can you relate in any sentence?
Yeah, I definitely can relate. And I think as we've grown up with screens, it's really just changed in a way, probably the chemicals in our brain. And so now we get these almost dopamine or energy hits in a different way. and we are satisfied by watching Instagram Reels or TikTok. Whereas a few generations ago, they were satisfied by having real social interaction. But I still am, like you are, satisfied by having real social interaction. I mean, you can see it with this. Our microphones, mine especially, isn't the best quality. So sometimes you speak over each other accidentally. You don't have these audio visual cues that you have in real life. And when you actually have them away from the screen, it sort of feels quite satisfying to actually be talking to someone in real life, not just talking at a few pixels on a screen, which is effectively what we do quite a lot of the time. So I think, I think tech addiction is not necessarily addiction for me, in my opinion. It's rather a dependency we've built on it for ourselves because we are dependent on technology. And that has come at the expense of real world socialization. However, when I think you have that real world socialization nowadays, it makes it even nicer in a way. Because I know whenever I go visit a friend, let's say in London, it just feels so nice rather than messaging them on Snapchat, for example. What do you think, Max? Going back to the question, has tech addiction caused a generation of loneliness? Yeah.
Honestly speaking, I have to disagree about the part where you say it's not an addiction. It is an addiction. I mean, I personally would argue it is, but only certain parts of technology is an addiction. If you use it for like working or for productive means, you'll find it's actually a very good tool to help you get work done to an extent that wasn't previously possible. However, there is a huge addictive potency to it. And one of the real barriers to directly answering this question that vastly complicates the question whether tech addiction causes this loneliness epidemic and affects relationships, or whether it's the inverse. It's a carrot and stick problem. Not carrot and stick, sorry. It's a chicken and egg problem. You don't know what comes first and which comes. What is the cause and what is the effect? It seems to be a self-perpetuating cycle if you think about it, because video games only really came into popularity due to the fact, because initial stage of video games, they were like low graphics, they were nowhere as addictive, technologically speaking, as they are today. However, they gained popularity initially due to the fact that society accommodates this isolation because it is more economically efficient to do so. It is more economically efficient to play video games, to stare in front of a screen, than to build a basketball court and have people play on it. For some reason, because that generates more enterprise, it's more economically, there's more incentive towards that. And the problem is regulation doesn't really see this as anything bad. We don't see this being looked down upon because society is increasingly pressuring individuals to go against their biological nature and social nature of being or having social interactions. Exactly like you said, that's why, sadly speaking, it is true that you feel so much happier and it feels so much more precious seeing people and having genuine deep connections in real life, because it's becoming increasingly scarce, so that's why we value it more. But the question is then, if this is the case, is it right to facilitate this level of societal loneliness and to consider it fine just because under the argument or prerequisite condition of it being more economically efficient? Do you think that's responsible? Should we do something about it?
I honestly think at the end of the day, it's a consequence of technology that we just have to accept. I think there's a famous Barack Obama quote, and it's something on the lines of, if you ask anyone in history, which year they could have lived in, they'd definitely say the year we're in right now. And that is because of things like technology, which have brought so many benefits to us. And these benefits are huge. It's grown the economy. It's led to so many benefits in healthcare, in defense, and in so many other realms. It's absolutely countless, the benefit that technology has brought to us. And it's sort of just an unintended consequence, you could say, to use a term from economics, or an unintended consequence of technology is just a generation which is going to be slightly lonelier. It's going to have more limited social skills than the past. There is going to be less real life social interaction. However, the nature of interaction will just change. Our idea of loneliness will shift to, let's say, perhaps in a few years, not talking to someone over a screen. Because that will just become the norm. You're lonely if you aren't chatting to someone on Snapchat or WhatsApp. And so I think ideas around loneliness will really change as we do see that we are dependent on technology and technology is just becoming our norm. What do you think, Max, about that?
I actually would disagree with you on that
Yeah.
because I would say the reason why there even is a loneliness epidemic, because according to your rationale, you know, the status quo of what is defined as loneliness and evolution would adapt to it. I could see that being an argument for 10,000 years in the future when like humans can biologically evolve to accommodate high levels of dopamine. But I do not see that happening in the near future because we're biologically still the same speaking. And the fact that currently
Yeah.
people, I mean, we are interconnected. Like, who here, unless you're an absolute basement dweller, who does not at least text one or two people per day? It could be your parents, it could be your friends. You have text conversations at least with two people per day. You send at least more than a message a day and receive more than a message a day. So, technically speaking, by those definitions, according to you, they would not be lonely, but there is still a growing loneliness epidemic. I feel like it is a much deeper issue with how we're developed to adapt and develop to take in these levels of dopamine and interaction. Because I believe that while, yes, we are being more interconnected, even having a video chat right now instead of having an IRL podcast does add this barrier to it, that it's this human level intimacy and barrier that deprives us of some sort of satisfaction and gratification we cannot truly get from devices. And I believe that is what is the differentiating factor between fake dopamine and real dopamine. So, the same thing is with video games. I mean, people inherently started playing video games when they were bored, but now that people play it to be interconnected and they play it with their friends. However, the happiest children, scientifically, or from studies, the happiest children are those, speaking in technical terms, who have ongoing internet connections with their friends. So after school, they'll chat with them, they'll play games with them, but they also have sustained, prolonged in person interaction because that develops what is actually missing through digital interaction. You need both to consolidate it. But the problem is digital connection, yes, it is improving connectivity, but it's seen more as a reinforcing factor than a pilastra of itself to develop this intimacy and this in-person relationship that is necessary for a person to thrive socially speaking.
Yeah, I agree with you there. But I also disagree with you in many ways as well, because when you did say that real world interaction nowadays is bringing kids the social skills which they miss from being on a screen, I think in reality that will just shift in a few years because people will just find themselves not needing real world skills that aren't involved with technology, especially as nowadays we see our dependency on technology is increasing. We're more and more dependent on technology. So the normal social skills will slowly, in my opinion, blend in to the skills needed for technology.
Mm.
However, what I do agree with you though, is that there is a certain magic in real life socialization,
Yep.
which you will never be able to achieve on a screen. And I think whenever we talked about it earlier on, but whenever I think just actually meeting up with someone is so much nicer than FaceTime.
Yeah.
However, we are creatures that evolve. So, and maybe this is another question for you, Max, as well. So do you perhaps think that, and I do think this, that maybe our brains are going to change to believe that in a few years, this kind of social interaction is perhaps better than in real life social interaction if we're doing this so much? I don't know. What do you think about how our brains could evolve according to technology?
I mean, personally speaking, I've been using social media since 2019, 2018, and I don't think my brain's really evolved since then. Can't tell because if my prefrontal cortex is still developing because I'm not an adult, but I personally don't think like I can see your argument taking shape in the sense that humans and all species do evolve. However, that would require like centuries, if not not like
Yeah.
literal millennia to happen because that's how I mean from Homo sapiens to the our predecessor species, how many thousands, 100,000s of years was that? And although this is like a small adaptation, still feel like it's a significant share evolutionary speaking. I mean, you have Barack Obama, who contrasts to what you said initially about the technology. He himself quoted on Twitter. He was quoted saying, "We have to be careful about how much time we spend on our devices and make sure we're interacting with people in real life." That is and I feel like there's a part of that that really resonates, especially coming from someone who is as busy and as dependent,
Yeah.
who is virtually a cyborg himself, Barack Obama. In order to carry out, I don't think he sends physical letters or holds speeches with people in person. He has video conferences, he has emails, he has this and that. But at the end of the day, if he still prioritizes in-person interaction, that goes to show that I do not believe the status quo will really shift. I mean, we as society could be more accepting in our definition of loneliness, but that is not to say that our feelings of loneliness and our internal biological definition of loneliness would change. I would see that be more of a persistent issue with different definitions externally rather than an internal evolution to adapt to this new lack of in-person interaction, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah, I can sort of see where you're coming from there. But I do think eventually our ideas of and you sort of stressing it slightly, that our ideas of loneliness will evolve, perhaps, as we become more dependent. As perhaps the last point of discussion, I thought I'd perhaps read out a tweet by the very infamous Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, in which he talks about social media and tech addiction. So he says, social media is creating a crisis of self-esteem for young people. We must take steps to protect our mental health and cultivate real-world relationships. So in this, Prince Harry really attacks social media. So Max, going back to social media, if it was like a balancing scale, is social media more of a negative for you or a positive?
I would say it initially sought out to be a tool for socialization and to aid in-person interaction because that's how Facebook came around, to meet more people. And in that sense, initially the intention was good. However, corporative speculation has transitioned the goals and objectives of social media to be a attention farming machine to help raise advertising and marketing revenue for big firms. So now it is more focused on irresponsibly addicting individuals. I mean, you've seen the Facebook and TikTok indictments by U.S. government. They've quite literally cracked down on these apps and vowed to almost ban them. I mean, of course, these plans have been abandoned because the economic and financial dependency, unfortunately and catastrophically, is so large that it takes precedent over the well-being of those children dependent and influenced by social media. So I would say it is hard to objectively argue whether it's good or bad. It has its downsides, and it's very dependent on how we use it as people. And I believe one thing that needs to be said about social media is it should not be taken at face value. It is like a pharmaceutical drug. Let's say it like this. It should come with a label that you as an adult or responsible rational adult can make decisions and be aware that social media has its consequences depending on how you use it. I know people who use social media just for logistics, to text people. Certain people use it to scroll, and certain people use it to basically base their entire personality out of a digital aura of themselves, which doesn't exist. So everybody, everybody can have their own interpretation and use of social media, and depending on that use, it is also therefore a subjective matter whether it's good or not. It depends how you use it and to what extent you use it.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from there, definitely. But in my opinion, social media is as good or as bad as any other form of entertainment that we've seen come into existence. You know, with the TV, like with social media, you can get a lot of knowledge from a TV, some reliable, some not. It's also a very good form of entertainment.
Yeah.
So looking at those two aspects, social media is just another form of entertainment through which you can derive knowledge, almost like a book. Books you could say cause loneliness. So what social media can also cause loneliness. It's a place of entertainment where you can get knowledge like a book. And in many ways, social media's got benefits which previous forms of entertainment didn't have. As you said there, the logistics side of social media means it's quite amazing if you think about it, that you can just be almost talking to someone without actually talking to them at all. You know, I think they call it talking with your fingers because it literally is that. So I would actually say that overall social media, I would tip it slightly more towards good than bad. Because I think like any form of entertainment and sharing of knowledge like TVs or books, it's got its positives and its negatives. But there's this huge logistical and economical side to social media that is hard to ignore. And I mean, nowadays, I still sort of find it quite startling in a way. And I am of the generation where it happens. But it's to think that people can totally make their whole livelihoods off social
Yeah.
media.
that is-
And it's Mr. Beast. I mean, apparently he's nearly like a billionaire. He's worth hundreds of millions. And he has purely based his, well, prodigious wealth off social media.
I mean, yeah, it's a good point you raised, and actually, your analogy to TV and other forms of entertainment, I hate to, but I have to agree with you. I believe that a more refined version of what I'm saying is that, um, technically, taken at face value, social media is no different from other forms of entertainment. There's good and bad. The only thing that makes social media stand out in this regard is it's more accessible and therefore addictive than other forms of media. I mean, you get much more dopamine out of quick short form content that constantly revolves, and it's so much more accessible because it's quite literally in your pockets 24/7. So it is those things that differentiate social media from other types of media. And I would argue that on itself, in of itself, it is a very versatile and beneficial tool that will open up many possibilities for the future. It allows individuals to multitask. I mean, there are certain benefits to multitasking through social media that are evident, but I do say that, and I will stick by this, that social media requires an extra layer of precaution that may not be necessary for conventional forms of entertainment just because of its ease of access and its implications and how easy it is to overdo it.
Yes, and whilst we do try and disagree agreeably, I do agree with you there as well. Because if you think about how science has developed, social media brands have been able to use this to implement algorithms which literally are addictive. They appeal to these addictive senses we have in our brains to make us doom scroll subconsciously. So I think social media has really been able to harness the amount of knowledge and science we have to create quite a potentially dangerous tool if it's misused.
Yeah.
Yes. But with that, I think we're able to conclude the third pilot episode of our podcast. Yeah.